A successful realtor, world traveler, wife, and mom. Now, an accused murderer. For the last 14 years, she seems to have been living her best life. But according to police in Texas, she has been hiding a dark secret since 2012.
The Tarrant County medical examiners later determined that she was stabbed more than 100 times.
Police say she is allegedly a cold-blooded killer. The critical mistake this mom turned murder suspect allegedly made that police say helped crack a more than decade-old cold case. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. You cannot outrun your past, especially a past as allegedly dark as the one belonging to a Texas real estate agent named Mayra Velasquez. Her home for now is a county jail. She may never be free again. She is charged with capital murder. Now, I think you can see it in her eyes when you look at this mugshot. That life for her is never going to be the same. But you have to wonder, are those tears of someone wrongly accused? Or are they the tears of a killer who could no longer outrun the consequences for what she did allegedly more than a decade ago?
Our homicide detective got a call from the FBI letting them know that the IGG process had identified a potential suspect, 42-year-old Mayra Velasquez. She was a close friend of the victim who lived just a few miles away from the crime scene. With this new information in hand, our homicide unit began conducting follow-up investigation into Ms. Velasquez. In May, they were able to obtain a sample of DNA from a discarded trash, and we sent it to our crime lab for further analysis. The lab determined that the DNA was a match to the droplet of blood recovered from the crime scene.
That's part of the news conference held earlier today in Arlington, Texas, announcing Mayra Velasquez's arrest. Now, it appears the murder suspect has been living a luxurious life since that day in 2012. Her social media shows her vacationing around the world, Paris, Jamaica, truly living a dream with a family by her side. Now, I want to walk you through how this cold case came to be and what they say Velasquez left behind that helped police crack this case. I want you to meet the victim in this story, Irasema Chavez. She was 33 years old when she was found stabbed to death inside her apartment in Arlington in January of 2012. Police say that she had been stabbed more than 100 times. One of the major pieces of evidence is this video from the night of her murder. It's surveillance video that police say shows a shadowy figure in sweats going up the stairs to Chavez's apartment. You can see they keep their head down. It does appear that they try to open the door, but after that, they just wait. And after about a minute, the door opens and they go inside. Family members went to check on Chavez the next morning and they found her dead.
The Tarrant County medical examiners later determined that she was stabbed more than 100 times. A TV was reported missing from the apartment. We believe that the killer took the TV. Detectives at the time conducted a very thorough investigation, pursued several leads, but they could not fully identify the suspect.
Now, as you saw in the surveillance video, there were no signs of forced entry into Chavez's apartment. Perhaps it was a sign that she knew her killer. But Chavez's murder went cold. The Arlington City website listed her case as a cold case, and they put this profile up in hopes that someone could submit a tip that could one day lead to an arrest. Police say after they processed the scene, they had one crucial piece of evidence.
The strong lead that we had was a droplet of fresh blood that was recovered from a bedroom TV stand inside the apartment. The crime lab determined that the blood sample did not come from the victim and it belonged to an unidentified Hispanic female. Detectives uploaded the DNA profile into CODIS, which is a national database used to compare DNA profiles in criminal investigations. But we've never got a match.
In 2016, 4 years after Chavez's murder, that blood sample taken from a TV stand in her apartment was provided to a DNA testing company called Parabon Nanolabs. The company was able to put a profile together of what the killer may look like. And this is what they came up with: a woman believed to be in her 20s. Let's just take a moment to talk about this. The fact that technology, even to that point, had developed to where you could create an image just like that is nothing short of incredible. But even with that image, Chavez's case remained cold, allegedly for another decade.
So in November 2024, our homicide detectives unit met with the FBI and let them know about the unknown DNA profile we had. We asked the FBI if they consider using the investigative genetic genealogy to generate a lead for us. They graciously agreed.
In 2024, Arlington police asked the FBI to help take on the case and test the blood sample using genetic genealogy. Joseph Scott Morgan, professor of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University, longtime death investigator, is going to join me here in just a moment to talk about how that technology works. But essentially, it means that you can match a potential suspect to a DNA sample going through their family tree using publicly available databases like 23andMe. Now, police in this case won't say where they got the break that led them to Velasquez. Eventually, law enforcement, though, zeroed in on her as a potential suspect in January of this year. She's a 42-year-old mom who on social media appeared to work as a real estate agent in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And police say she did know the victim. They were close friends, and Velasquez actually lived close to Chavez back in 2012.
She was a close friend of the victim who lived just a few miles away from the crime scene. With this new information in hand, our homicide unit began conducting follow-up investigation into Ms. Velasquez. In May, they were able to obtain a sample of DNA from a discarded trash, and we sent it to our crime lab for further analysis. The lab determined that the DNA was a match to the droplet of blood recovered from the crime scene.
Mayra appears to have lived a life that so many would envy for the past 14 years. In 2013, we have pictures showing her pregnant on a beach, and now it appears she has a teenage son. Mayra also traveled the world. Her social media is like a travel blog of places from Europe to the Caribbean, and it's hard to believe as you look at those images that she is the same person who now has a mugshot charged with capital murder in a case that is nothing short of cold-blooded, allegedly stabbing someone that she knew who was considered a close friend of hers more than 100 times, according to police. But the seemingly carefree lifestyle of luxury may now be over forever for Velasquez. According to court records, once police narrowed in on her as a potential suspect, they started surveying her. And without her knowing, according to WFAA television, they followed Velasquez to a restaurant where she had lunch with friends. Police say when lunch was over, she left, and then undercover officers moved in and collected 2 plastic forks that she used, and they submitted it for testing. They also tested a cup reportedly and a plate, according to WFAA. Now, police say the DNA from a fork matched the DNA profile of that blood found in the bedroom on the TV stand of Irasema Chavez 14 years ago. Blood that police long believed belonged to the killer in this case. Police say they got a warrant for Velasquez's arrest in May, and they put her under arrest at a traffic stop last week. She is now charged with capital murder. At this point, there are still a lot of questions unanswered, though. We don't know the alleged motive for murder. Police say on top of that blood sample, they also have Chavez's cell phone, which provided what they are calling very valuable information in this case that gave a lot of context as to how Chavez knew her alleged killer, Mayra Velasquez. They also say that Velasquez had been in the apartment before. It is unclear if Velasquez was ever a person of interest back in 2012, but according to this news conference today, police say she did speak to investigators after her arrest, but it is unclear what she may have said. Police also said that at this time, they're not looking at anyone else in connection to this murder.
Miss Velasquez was interviewed, and in that interview, we learned information that will be helpful in that process. I'm not going to disclose that right now. They were friends, and Miss Velasquez had been in the apartment before. But we were able to obtain some information from her in the interview, which will help in her prosecution.
The lead detective on this case was asked about what it meant to her to finally make an arrest 14 years after this murder and what it was like to share the news with a family that had been waiting for justice and answers for so long.
Telling the family.
Oh, telling the family, that's why being able to share that with the family is why we do this work. They were very grateful. It was emotional, but everybody who's involved in this, whether you're the detective, whether you're on the FBI's IGG team, whether you're a crime scene working behind the scenes, everybody who touches a case like this feels that elation when it's solved, feels the pain for the family, and the reason why we all give so much of ourselves is for that.
Joining us now to talk more about this, Professor of Applied Forensics at Jacksonville State University, longtime death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan. Always great to have you here. And genetic genealogy, there's a lot of cases that we're seeing where this is used to crack something that seemed like it'd be unsolvable. And in this case, the FBI says in 2024, they started kind of building out this DNA profile. I know we've talked about this before. Like, I very early in school learned that science was not my path. So for those of us like me watching, or, who might be watching now, like in layman's terms for us, how does this genetic genealogy work, and how it kind of factored into this case out of Texas?
Well, it all, and by the way, thanks for having me back with you, Chris. It all springs from an industry that, has now popped up out there. And that's everybody wanting to find out what their ancestry is, right? What are our points of origin? So even if you have not, sent in a sample to one of these companies, there's a high probability that one of your distant relatives has sent in a sample. And because of that web that is created by doing a DNA profile on an individual, because one of the goals of these companies is to connect people as well. Because if you're constructing like a huge family tree, to look and see if you're related to Charlemagne, and I mean King, the king, which they say many of us are descended from. Because it's exponential, when you think about it. But if you bring it close to home, you can actually see where maybe a distant cousin, who are you related to? And I like to use this little word picture. And it's like when this DNA is submitted and you submit it in the course of a criminal investigation, you've got a distant cousin out there that is pointing their finger back at you as a potential to be added to the list. And Chris, these numbers are so astronomical. They're mind blowing when you think about it. Because in the old days, all we had was blood typing. Okay, the ABO groups, and the rarest blood type is like AB neg, and it happens in. I know I'm going to get pilloried for this, but it's like one in like 170 people have AB neg, and now you're talking about quintillions and octillions and all these sorts of numerical values. So you can have someone that's in the database already. They're not charged with anything. Okay. They're just in one of these commercial databases. And then you have an unknown sample that's found at a crime scene. Okay. Well, when it gets down to brass tacks, if they've recovered that, they're going to submit that into those databases that they have access to. And again, I go back to this work picture of a cousin pointing at you.
It's incredible to think. I mean, they said back in 2012, they have this droplet of blood that they believed came from the killer. They put it into CODIS, the FBI database. Nothing hits then. And you think for 14 years kind of waiting for answers. And then this technology is developed. 2024, the FBI takes it on. And then here we are today saying that they believe they have allegedly caught the killer. I want to go back to what we know about what happened in January 2012, Joseph, because Mayra Velasquez is accused of stabbing the victim more than 100 times. And it's like, just when you read that, I just think of like, if you were to count like tapping on a table 100 times, like how long
great
that, I mean,
great
just,
word picture.
you know, how long would that take you to tap 100 times? But this is far more gruesome than that. As someone who has, I'm sure, investigated, you know, many stabbing deaths, like take us into what that tells you about this killer. If she allegedly did this, that is how many times she stabbed this victim.
Yeah. Well, you have to think about, you know, we don't have to prove motive. Well, I say we. I don't have a mouse in my pocket. Prosecutor does not have to prove motive, but you have to think about a motivation, right? And one of the things that you'll get off into the behavioral sciences with is they'll start talking about things like overkill. Well, we see evidence of that in the medical legal world with the amount of trauma. Okay. Now, we're not talking about somebody that was run over by a car that can have extensive trauma. Okay. Right you are about pounding on the table, because every single time that weapon is utilized on an individual, that is an individual impact every time. Now, some of them are going to be deeper than others. Some will be superficial, because you're not going to have like 100 wounds in one specific area. More than likely, they're going to be all over. And trust me, the person that's being stabbed, if they're aware of it, they don't want to be stabbed. So what do? Well, they fight back and they try to defend themselves. So that individual that is the victim can raise their arm. You can have what appear to be defensive injuries, and that's a reactionary thing that happens. You know, people trying to block and parry, as they say in fencing. They're trying to block like this, so they'll get these injuries here. Then you can have them, you know, more concentric to the chest or to the back, depending upon the position the individual's in. They can roll away. You can have them on the sides. And here's one other piece to this that we see with overkill. Many times you'll get disfigurement, okay, because they will go after the face, all right? That's why many times when you have these frenzied overkill kind of events, your default position many times is an intimate relationship, that somebody is, and I don't mean that like in a sexual sense necessarily, but there is like connection, because you have to have the root of that for the jealousy to be driving this thing, or the anger. You know, who have you made this angry that they would do this 100 times? And, you know, and that's a number that they've put out there, you know, 100 times. And we don't even know if that's an approximation or if they literally counted 100 different injuries. Either way you look at it, though, it's extensive. And so whoever you're looking for, you have to think they've got to be kind of in the intimate circle. They would know this person, you know, unless somebody's psychotic and attacks an individual and stabs them 100 times. Most of the time you're going to be looking for somebody that is angry enough to perpetrate this kind of horrific event.
Yeah, and it's just no official motive at this point. We know, according to police, that they were close friends. There's surveillance video of who they believe is Mayra Velasquez entering the apartment that night. No forced entry, so they knew that it was someone that she knew, according to police. You have this droplet of blood that seemed to be, you know, if that wasn't left behind, I don't know if this arrest is happening, clearly, right? But at the same time, I'm thinking if I'm a defense attorney, I could say they were friends. She was in the house all the time. Like she was over and she cut her hand on the TV. Like, what can that blood, because police seemed very confident with the work that was done back in 2012 by the crime scene team, where they feel good about, you know, the way that this blood was handled, how it was kept. But how might the prosecutors be able to argue that not only is it her blood, which the DNA shows that, but it is blood that was dropped there in the act of such a terrible crime?
Yeah, and many times you'll have perpetrators, Chris, that when they're utilizing a knife, and most people don't think about that, only, you know, weird science people like me think about, you know, stuff like this, because we have to examine the dynamic of it, right? Blood gets very, very slippery. And trust me, with 100 individual insults to the body, the individual that had done this, the perpetrator that had, first off, would have had blood on them, certainly on their hands. it goes without saying, the knife. But what happens with that? Well, the knife and the surfaces as you're gripping it, and I don't care what kind of grip you got on this thing, after 100 times, and particularly the force, the fatigue that sets in, because there would be fatigue. Just think about doing 100 curls, all right? And you're being driven like this, just out of your mind. It gets slippery. And what you will find, particularly if it doesn't have a hand guard on it, go back to, the K-bar, in Idaho, right? That had a hand bar or a bar across it, right? And that should prevent somebody from going down the blade. But if you're using something like a butcher's knife that you have in your kitchen cabinet, that doesn't have a hand guard on it. So your hand can actually slide down the blade. It can nick you, even on the little corner there, it can cut you. And that little drop of blood that you might find, you cannot just merely assume that all blood there is associated with the victim. They did a jam up job with this case, because out of all the blood, as I previously stated, which there would have been a copious amount of, they found that one droplet. And it's from that one droplet that I believe, according to what we've heard, that they did phenotyping on that blood droplet, which kind of created a profile. It's not the same as the genetic genealogy, but I think that they had identified the subject as female, and they identified the subject as Latino, Hispanic, I think. And those are things that you can do with a profile that talks about, the race. They can even do, Chris, they can even do hair color, skin tone, height. There's these predictable things that you look for, and you would be amazed at how close they can get it. And didn't you say that there was like a rendering that was done or something?
Well, and that was the thing, where this rendering, where there was 2016, they take this blood droplet, they're able to put together what they believe the killer may look like, or who the blood belongs to. And then you look at a picture of Mayra Velasquez, and it is dead on. And it's one of those things, because I think for a lot of our cases we'll cover, and now with AI, they'll project to maybe what a missing child might look like today at the age of 25 or 35 or whatever the case may be. And there's so many times you look at it and you're like, this is great that we have this technology, but how accurate can it actually be? Very different kind of, situation.
Phenotyping is.
But to have a blood droplet and to say, this is what the person looks like. And then for it to be, age, face, hair color, it's incredible to just do the side by side of how this panned out.
Yeah, it's amazing how far we've come in this particular area. People talk about forensic genetic genealogy, and I'm fascinated by it, and it's got such great utility. But I think back to the old days where we did the clay modeling, of suspects or victims and that sort of thing. You're trying to get into it, and you kind of look at it. And I know everybody out there is kind of, maybe it looks like it. Dude, with phenotyping, holy smokes. It's amazing some of the renderings I've seen, these images, and they had this all the way back, in 16 when they dropped this image of the suspect. And then, you make the leap forward, and you kind of, by their measure, this is them saying that. That's not us saying this, because this thing, has not gone to trial. By their measure, they think that they have, zeroed in on a suspect here.
Yeah. And I guess just lastly, too, because we have so many of these cases. There's a story of Leslie Preer, who's a woman who was killed in Montgomery County, Maryland, which I think about a lot, because that was a cold case murder from 2001 that was solved, I think, in 24, very similar to this case. And people can go and watch our previous episodes on that one. And then you have this story where, you go to the Arlington, Texas, website, and they have a cold case section. And the story of Irasema Chavez, she is one of many unsolved murders from over the years. And there's so many cold cases that people will never know about that are out there. And yet we have this tool now that seems to be working really well and taking what seems like an impossible case and then cracking it like we're seeing. Is it a resource thing? Like, what goes into action? Because I know it's not a snap of the fingers to get to the point where you find this suspect, but I guess why isn't this used more often? Why is it something where the FBI kind of they have to pick and choose which cases are good candidates for this particular type of technology?
Well, I think it first starts, Chris, with the viability of the sample they have. How much of a sample do they have? These are destructive tests. Is there anything to go on? And going back just to a second with what you were referring to with, there's tons of, and I cover these cases all the time on my podcast because I have a real heart. I have a real heart for the dead, the voiceless. Okay, so we have a lot of unidentified bodies out there. Okay,
Yeah.
And I submit to you that if you can determine who someone is, and they may have met their end by horrible violence, that's the first step in a successful investigation. Can you imagine how, and I've been a part of these cases, particularly years ago, where you'd work a case and you might have a homicide victim. You don't know who they are. Well, if you know who they are, you begin to get into those little groups, that they're associated with. What are their running circles, as they say,
Yeah.
the family, social relationships, and all that stuff. Well, it works also with potential perpetrators too. Think about what was the connectivity between these two individuals, and that's something they're going to be digging into with this case as they move forward. To try to understand the relationship between who the prosecutor has named as their suspect and the victim, who's left with 100 stab wounds.
Yeah.
What's the driver behind this, to try to understand the dynamic of this?
Yeah, and the detective in the news conference today got emotional when asked about what the moment was like, where she informs Irasema Chavez's family that they had made an arrest. And you just think of just what that must have been like after waiting for so many years, after knowing that a loved one had been the victim of something as horrific as she was. We'll see what happens next. We'll see if there's a possible explanation to all of this from the defense's side. Of course, Mayra Velasquez is innocent unless she's proven guilty, and we'll continue to follow this case closely. Joseph Scott Morgan, you can catch his podcast, Body Bags, one of the best out there, professor of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
You bet, Chris. Thank you, buddy.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we are also streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.